Greetings, fellow gamers. Eric's UK here with another vid. Last week we had the news that Sean Connery, the original James Bond, had passed away. And so I thought, interrupt the World of Darkness games to review a game that I owned and ran maybe once or twice back in the very early 90s, which was the James Bond 007 RPG, published by Mayfair Games. I picked this up cheap. We had a game store over in Cambridge at the time. Really cool place called Games and Puzzles. Gone now, unfortunately, but it was my first experience of a hobby gaming shop. And I picked up the James Bond 007 game because I had some money burning in my pocket, and I went, oh, that sounds like fun. And I picked up a box set, which was the main rules plus another product called Thrilling Locations. Let me just double check my notes. Yes, Thrilling Locations, which gave you places like Monte Carlo casinos and I think the Orient Express and cool things like that for locations you could use in your game. I think I only ever ran it, I'm going to say twice, and it wasn't really a game that we got into. I found the system a little bit awkward and complicated and not very well explained. You'll see why, I mean, surely. And the guys never really took it seriously. It was always to them the sort of game that you had a laugh with. So they ended up with character names like Brooke Bond and Basildon Bond, and they probably won't mean anything to people outside the UK. Brooke Bond is a type of is a brand of tea, and Basildon Bond, I can't remember. I think it might have been a character in a comedy show or something like that in the 80s or 70s. But yeah, we never took it particularly seriously, but we had a bit of a fun with it. So basically you could, depending on the sort of game that the games master wanted to run, you could play three sorts of games. You basically sort of like had rookie agents, you had secret agents, and then you had a 007, who were the agents who had a license to kill. Obviously, nobody's going to want to play the earlier ones. So they're all going to go for 00 agents. And I'll be honest, a lot of the system character creation I don't really remember. I remember that the system used like a D6 and D10 sided mechanic, and used a I can't think what it was called now, but you basically had a sort of target number, but you had these tables you had to cross-reference. From one side would be the difficulty, one side would be something else, and you saw you went across, and that was your target number, where it was listed. And you had sort of like qualities of roles, so poor, acceptable, good, very good, exceptional, something like that. It was a little bit odd, as I recall. I can't remember the stats. I think there was like 4 of them. I think it was just something like strength, dex, willpower, charisma, something like that. Might have been an intelligence one in there. I really don't remember after all this time. And these ranged from, I think, something like about 5 up to 15. And you had a point system to generate your character, and what you didn't use in stats could be used to buy skills, and you also had to pick sort of like traits, and I can't remember whether, I want to say height and weight was actually included in that. You actually had to buy those sort of appearances, but you could also buy things like fame, so you were well known. You weren't just a regular agent, you were known like Bond was, or you could have a villain or something like that. Something that might turn up, or a contact that might turn up in each game, or what have you. I remember the skills were a little bit odd. You had your usual sort of things like disguise and demolitions, seduction, first aid. I think there was like a carousing or connoisseur or something like that that everybody had. And I remember that you had experience points that were used at the end of a scenario or mission as they were called, to then increase stats, skills, buy skills, and so on. I also think there was like a hero point system that you could use to modify results or survive if something really bad happened. Where I think either we were doing it wrong or it didn't read well in the book was, for example, the book I spoke about that came with my box set was called Thrilling Locations, and it contains, as I say, hotels, casinos, restaurants, the Orient Express, so on, floor plans, NPCs, and so on. But you had your scenario that you'd come up with. But let's say you're in Monte Carlo and one of the agents goes to a casino. You haven't planned for this, so what do? Well, you can make stuff up, as you always do in RPGs. But this particular book had random tables. So they'd go there and you'd have it was another one, sort of like a D3 versus D3 or D6, D6. And you roll and cross-reference. And it could be that you ended up playing, roulette or backgammon or whatever against the boss, the evil villain. You might run into a femme fatale, the love interest for the session. You might run into some mooks who try and bump you off. You might run into Q or a friendly agent like Felix Leiter. It had. You might run into Jaws or other characters. And it kind of felt really weird because it almost felt like whenever a character went anywhere, it was random what you would run into or who you would run into. And I don't know whether they intended that to be the case and just didn't word it very well, or whether this was just, if the characters go here and you're not sure what to do, roll to see what happens. It was never very well explained, and we never really sort of understood exactly how you were supposed to do it. Did you write a scenario and then just use these as random drop-ins when something happened, or they went somewhere that wasn't planned, as I say. Now, the other thing that they did, which was quite cool, the game only ran for about 7 years, I think, something like that. But they released a shed load of adventures which were based on the actual films. I had Live and Let Die, the voodoo sort of style one with Roger Moore. Now, what they did with these were in little box sets, and they came with the scenario, the booklets, some absolutely gorgeous handouts. Always came in these little padded envelopes. And to ensure that just because the players had seen the film, they weren't ever going to get it, they tweaked the scenarios. So they weren't the same as the film. There were variations on it. Never actually got to run Live and Let Die. We always just tried to run some sort of like basic scenarios first. And I only had the game for a couple of years before, quite frankly, we sort of like lost interest in it. It wasn't something. We've never been big on sort of like the espionage games, that sort of thing. And I think it was only because it was James Bond that we had an interest here. And I remember about 10 or 12 years ago selling what I had to my local game store at the time for some store credit. For some reason, I think in the late 80s or early 90s, Mayfair Games lost the rights. I think there was some sort of copyright issues or a desire from one side or the other not to renew the license. And I don't think anyone has ever done a James Bond RPG since, not an official one anyway. You never know. In the last, 20 years, Bond has sort of like picked up again in the films, in the cinema. So one might do it. You never know. So this version wasn't... I don't think it was a bad game. I just don't think it was very well worded, very well written. I think it's one of those games, if you really knew what they were on about with some of it, it probably made sense. But the system could have been better, and the explanations how certain things worked could be better. So with that, we're written on the 11-minute mark now. So I'm going to leave it at that. Did you ever play this game? Did you ever own it? What are your thoughts on it? Does James Bond make for a good RPG game or campaign? You let me know, and I look forward to your comments in the comment section down below. Anyway, take care, guys. Thanks for listening, and good gaming.